Welcome everybody. This is week 5, and I welcome everyone if you're on phone or if you're on video, and I really want everyone to chime in if you thought of something or when you're reading the chapter. If you didn't read everything, don't worry about it. I'm going to put enough things, I think, on the screen that we're going to have stuff to chew on. And there was a lot of stuff in these 4 chapters to chew on. I thought I'd start with an interesting fact about C.S. Lewis.
Well,
C.S. Lewis gave himself the nickname Jaxie for an important reason. He was 4 years old, and little Clive's beloved dog Jaxie was hit by a car and killed. He had a lot of tragedy in his life.
Oh.
But he told everybody he'd change his name to Jaxie. Even as an adult, he went by Jack, and he always hated the name Clive, which is why he goes by CS.
Huh. I would have
Clive,
too.
Clive Staples. I know, who would name their kid Clive? I mean,
Yeah.
you know, that's not.
I know one.
Yeah.
Really?
Well, a lot of you know who the Clive is from their tour guide. From
Oh, really?
So he and Anne.
So these chapters 3 through 6, book 3, and remember, each one of these chapters is something he gave over the radio. I'm thinking like an 8 or 10 minute address or something like that. So these 4 chapters are going to be social morality, morality and psychoanalysis, sexual morality, Christian marriage. So please, spouses that are here, no fighting. Onboard question. Does morality change? Why or why not?
Well, I noticed one point that C.S. Lewis brought out that I felt was a change in our acceptance of a certain morality. He deemed a man wanting a man as immoral.
Yeah.
And I feel that at least our American culture has come around to see that differently now, that it really is not necessarily not a case of morality.
Yeah. Yeah. Boy, you really did dive right into it. That's supposed to come about the 5th slide.
It's a very old understanding.
Yeah, I mean, he will say, he says this is not his belief, although he does say what he believes sometimes. This is what, when he surveyed all the Christian denominations, I guess in the 50s, that pretty much everyone agreed on this. The Catholics, the Methodists, the Episcopalians, whoever. And so this is kind of what was agreed upon. And he also made the distinction. There are things that are appropriate. Oh, I forget the word he said. It'll be on the next slide. But yeah, he says there's certain things that change and certain things that don't. So let's go to the next slide. The real job of every moral teacher, says Lewis, is to keep on bringing us back time after time to the simple old principles which we are also anxious not to see. He kind of thinks like, there's some things we don't want to see. I remember when Steve Martin said, he did this routine and he said, and I believe in 7 of the 10 commandments. Some things we would rather ignore.
Yeah.
He says, Christianity does not provide a detailed political program for applying do as you would be done by to a particular society at a particular moment. When it tells us to feed the hungry, it does not give us lessons in cookery, he says. And it's not intended to replace or supersede ordinary human arts and sciences. Some things are a matter of social etiquette and propriety nowadays, which does change. He will say the Bible teaches that things like do unto others and do unto you don't change. Like, it's probably not okay to go kill your neighbor because you don't like the way their house looks, and that that probably won't change. So the question is, do we need to be reminded, and how are we reminded?
I don't know. Sometimes it's hard to differentiate between that social morality and, as he would say, that Christian morality.
Right. Right. And it's probably a lifelong work to
And
figure that
yes, yes, absolutely.
out.
But I
I think
It's like a good problem, though. If you can't differentiate between social morality and Christian morality, that's a good thing. I sort of think. I mean, it sounds like then they would be equals.
Oh, I see what you're saying. I'm thinking when they're not equal.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So which ones would change and which ones do not?
Okay.
For me, that social morality does change.
Yeah, right.
I'm sorry, Mary, go ahead.
Well, and then I'm thinking, well, I think we do need to be reminded of how to treat others.
Yep.
And how to be kind and treat others well when we are not being treated well, because our instincts take over and we want to lash out or be as hurtful as we have been hurt. And we do need those reminders to have a Christian outlook than a social outlook, because I think a social outlook would say, you can do anything you want. They were mean to you, go ahead.
Yeah.
Well, it
Yeah.
depends on your social, what social group you're in. But one of my questions was, does what is social morality versus Christian morality, does that change over time?
Mm-hmm.
Like he felt like, and we are maybe getting ahead, that homosexuality was Christian morality, but today we might think of it as social morality. So,
Yeah.
It occurs to me that a lot of us, I'm raising my hand, a lot of us instinctively would say that Christian morality doesn't change. I mean, that would have been my instinct until I encountered a couple of people who reminded me, sitting in Christ Church in Tuscaloosa, that the wall against which the high altar is placed has 2 areas of exposed brick, old bricks. And those bricks were made by the slaves that helped build the building. And the bricks are there and exposed as a reminder that there was a time when Christian morality was that we could enslave people and we could have them work for nothing. And Swanee, I wish Sherry were here. Father Bill can support this if he chooses. Swanee was built on the backs of slaves.
It was.
And
They don't talk about it, but it was.
and it was at the heart of that Christian theology.
but doesn't that then argue for the fact that, was it Christian morality? Does Christian morality change?
Yes.
Or do we just think it changes? Or is that really social morality?
I would
say social.
We haven't defined it. We haven't really defined it too good. Let's go to the next slide.
Let me wrap a ribbon around what I wanted to say, please, because it's important to me that you know where I am anyway. There's an element of Christian morality that's at the core that is inviolate. Love each other and love God. And the trouble is, those 2 simple statements can be, if you choose to let them be, all-consuming. I mean, love one another doesn't have any footnotes except for these groups. Love God, okay, but it doesn't have exceptions like you can burn and rape my forests, you can tear up the Amazon, you can destroy my world. Oh, by the way, we're having heat waves someplace.
Yeah.
If you think of God as being the creator, we're tearing up his world. And he said, just love me, please. So there are core Christian beliefs that I don't think change. There are those Christian beliefs, thank you, Katie, that I think are very social in nature, that I think evolve. Thank you. Thank you, Tom, for letting me say that.
Sure. And then remember a few chapters back, there is something that's written into our hearts. There's some kind of a natural law that we all have an instinct about, which doesn't say everything. But the other thing that dawned on me is, are there any of the 10 commandments that are no longer valid or that we should no longer follow? I can't think of one. You know, about covetousness, about murder, about loving God, about stealing, you know. I think those are,
witness.
I think they're all inviolate, as the word.
I have one. Honor
What?
your. I have one.
Uh-huh.
Honor your father and mother.
Yeah.
That should be disregarded.
There are children who are seriously abused by their parents. And
Yeah, then you have to think.
I think it's wrong to tell them that they should honor their father and mother and do exactly what they say.
But I think that also involves what it means to honor your mother and your father. I mean, to me, honoring my mother and father to get them help for what, you know, to still love them and still want them to not do the sins they're doing. I mean, so, you know, so that word honor is kind of a loaded or a little bit
and
malleable.
surely back in history, parents have abused their children. I mean, I still think that God would have said, honor your mother and father. And there were cases that were awful cases against children even then. So I agree that not necessarily that it's the child, it's certainly not that it's the child's responsibility to get their parent help when they're young, but maybe the biological mother and father are, you know, Jesus, when Jesus was dying, he said, John, this is your mother, or, you know, so there, hopefully everyone in this world is loved by someone eventually that could be loved like a mother, like a father.
Yeah, and all the virtues can be corrupted. We covered some of that ground too. So let me keep those thoughts in your head. Let me read the next few and you follow along with me. Christianity is kind of like a director which will set them, he said them, people, to the right jobs, is a source of energy to give new life, if only they will put themselves at its disposal. Christians are those who happen to have the right talents. Economists and statesmen should be Christians. Their efforts in politics and economics should be directing to putting do as you would be done by into action. And he uses this over and over. It's kind of the summary of Christian morality, the way Lewis believes most Christians believe. Then that would be the laity. And then the clergy are those particular people within the whole church who have been especially trained and set aside to look after what concerns us as creatures who are going to live forever, is the way he puts it. And he puts in there, talks about, you know, it's not a prescription for a certain political program. So if you remember that part in your reading. So any comments? Do you agree with these definitions of clergy versus lay people as far as being Christian in a Christian community? And is there anything else that, I mean, I'm skipping over a ton of stuff, so.
Well, it certainly is a rather dated view, in my opinion, that economists and statesmen should be Christians. We see all over the world people who are not Christians in those roles, and might I add, they are often quite good at what they do. I think that living in a country such as ours, unlike England at the time that he was living there. We have a lot more diversity. We have more religions. I mean, now they do too, but I think that to make pat statements like that, I just don't agree with it.
Well, I condensed it. So I'm not sure he's saying you can't be an economist or statesman if you're not a Christian. He's saying he's writing and speaking to people who've already believed that there's something to Christianity, that you're already willing to believe that the principles behind Christianity are valid. So he's basically saying you don't get your marching orders from the priests and the deacons. You get if you want people that are to put into effect the law that Christ taught, then there should be economists doing economy work. There should be statesmen doing political work. That he's almost saying it's dangerous to cross theological and more
Secular.
Secular lines. That's the way I read it.
Is he saying first you're the Christian and then you're what you follow in your life, if it's politics or economics, then that draws you or helps you in your work, so that you're following the commandment to do in your job as you would want to be done to you. Is that?
That was a part of what he said. But then he also ended with, we should find the Christian solution for our own social problems pretty quickly.
Yeah. And he's also saying, if we really had a Christian society, the way Christ envisioned, then you wouldn't have business and economist people making every decision for the bottom line for next month, for example. You wouldn't have what was the other thing? Politics. You wouldn't have politicians saying anything to anyone just to get voted in, because that isn't really doing unto others as you would have them do unto you.
And I think
right? There's this. Yeah. Go ahead.
I think there was a time, and actually it was before C.S. Lewis, when peoples of at least two faiths lived in reasonable harmony. In the Middle East, there was a time when the Muslims, let's just use the word allowed, I'm not sure that's the right word, but when Muslims and Christians lived together in harmony, in peace, there was a time. Because as some people argue, and I don't think we want to open that can of worms now, but if Christ said love each other, he didn't say except for,
right,
he said love each other.
Right.
And in fact, Muhammad's teachings included a very similar passage of loving each other. Now, the trouble is that we managed to get that off the rails, and they managed to get it off the rails. But the thing that I find about his writings is that they are powerfully provocative, because if we treat them word by word by word, we can just attack the stew out of them. Because
remember, these are speeches to a certain population during a war when their whole way of life was about ready to go down the drain if the Nazis. So he's speaking to people that probably were pretty together in their social senses of opposing that.
But there's lessons there for us, I believe.
Sure, I
found lessons for us today in today's society.
All right, so so we're still going to be thinking about this same thing. So Lewis says in the New Testament, quote, gives us a pretty clear hint of what a fully Christian society would look like. Perhaps it gives us more than we can take. It tells us that there are to be no passengers or parasites. If a person does not work, they ought not to eat. Everyone is to work with his own hands, and what is more, everyone's work is to produce something good. No manufacturer of silly luxuries and none of sillier advertisements to persuade us to buy them. And I think, well, that's all we got now.
It's
And
a different
who
one.
determines that? And who determines that? Anyway.
Well, no,
Yeah.
Christian, and then he says, I'll just read this other one, then we'll stop. Christianity is the total plan for the human machine. We have all departed from that total plan in different ways, and each of us wants to make out that his own modification is the original plan, is the plan itself. You will find this again and again about anything that is really Christian. Everyone is attracted by bits of it and wants to pick out those bits and leave the rest. So, thoughts, comments?
I really like the sentences on page 87. Christian society is not going to arrive until most of us really want it. And we are not going to want it until we become fully Christian. So I really think that says a lot. We all have to.
I've got that on. Yeah, I
Okay.
put that one in. Yeah, two more slides. Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
That's like,
this is about our condition of our heart and a condition of our, actually, even if we really didn't like our neighbor, how do you not like someone but still wish their best? Wish to C.S. Lewis, we're all beings who are going to live forever. So how do you translate that even when things rub you the wrong way? Right?
I was going to ask Alice, and I've had the chance to get to know Alice a little bit in EFM. I hope a lot more in coming years. Alice, when he uses the phrase Christian, you won't be able to do it until you become fully Christian. In your mind, what does it mean to be fully Christian?
well, I think it goes back to that statement about do unto others as you would have them do to you. I think it's to really believe that you would be treating everyone you encounter in the day the way you'd want to be treated. It's about love. It's about pure and simple opening your heart and just being available, being kind, being open to loving and being loved back.
What if somebody said
At
that's
some
just
point,
not
he
it?
also talks about, we don't even know how to love God. God is asking us to obey God. And that is not a word that we like to use
That's a
in
good point.
our day-to-day activities. We stopped using that in marriage vows, and not that, we need to have that in marriage vows, but there was a little bit of like, what? What? I don't think I'm going to obey you. And I think that calls into question some relinquishing of our rights to honor God's and accept the authority of God. And that is hard to do for me.
A Christian society, and
me.
let me just add, a Christian society is a place where you are like Christ. You accept your place as a servant. That's why you're not supposed to be lazy and just sit around and take. You're supposed to do something, anything. There's no status, there's no higher or lower status, something that you can contribute so you're not looking at yourself all the time. To me, that is a very Christian outlook. And not to say it's not any other outlook, but certainly it's a Christ-like. Makes sense?
And I don't even think that first New Testament thing, what the New Testament says Christianity, I couldn't even accept half of that. So, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think if a person doesn't work, he can't eat. Well,
Yeah.
we have a food pantry outside feeding people that can't.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people that can't.
But we don't. All right. I thought of that too. We don't know those people don't work. Right. We have social and economic problems.
That's the way it's supposed to be, according to him.
People work, and they still don't have enough. I don't think he says there's not that problem.
Right.
And you have to define what the word.
But I don't
work
even know if
means.
that's the right way to even think.
Right,
Yeah.
I agree.
Well, that's specifically in the Bible. If you
Well, I can say other parts, you know, where they, with the deacons serving they had to come up with deacons to serve the tables because the widows weren't getting their part. I can come up with all sorts of things that go different than what, you know, that's just too hard of a view of a Christian.
Yeah, it is. It's a
And
hard
I
part.
don't, I think I can come up with other parts that the Bible,
Oh, yeah.
that the New Testament is saying the exact opposite.
Look at the next slide. This one's really hard too, about usury. The Bible and many Christians have told us not to lend money at interest. But lending money at interest is what we call investment, is a basis of our whole system. So C.S. realizes there's contradictions. He's trying to say this is, I don't know, I think he's trying to say this is kind of part of the package that is Christianity for most Christians at that time. You know, I mean, we can argue about how you implement these things, I guess, and we will.
Jews weren't allowed to lend money either. I mean, that was part of
Oh,
their
yeah. Yeah, he said at least 3 major religions and 3 major eras, usury was a huge no-no.
Right.
But, yeah, it's part of life.
And now now our businesses depend on it. So that's a place where you just can't, and somewhere in this chapter, he said, you just can't expect, Christianity does not provide, 50 laws and 50 rules. If you follow these, you're a Christian.
No,
It is how we as citizens and as Christians implement the do unto others part. We are a living, dynamic of the law.
And just to go back to think about the work, that is such a broad word, that I just don't think it means you work, you get paid.
Right.
Because there's also work that's done to talk with someone or encourage someone or to be with someone, which can be work when people are difficult or you're having a hard time and you have to give up some of yourself. And so I think that work is not just I'm going to go out and plow a field.
You're saying work is more like the word serve or service to another.
That's the way I see it. It's like if you are a person who takes and demands it and you deserve it and I want you to give it to me, then I think it calls into question your ideas about Christianity or faith or how you're getting to be with other people. Does that sound judgmental?
Yeah.
In this next slide, I picked out a couple sentences where it sort of elaborates a little bit, and as like, here's the important thing C.S. Lewis says: if this doesn't help you clarify your understanding of Christianity, discount it. He says disregard it. He says it's his kind of, after many years studying, it's his takeaway in his context. He said the New Testament says everyone must work. It gives us a reason, quote, in order that he may have something to give to those in need. Charity means giving to the poor and is an essential part of Christian morality. I think that is not negotiable, at least the second part of that. Right? Everyone can contribute something.
Yes.
In my opinion.
Yeah.
But not everyone can work.
Say it again.
Well, it's like Mary said, he uses the word work. I mean,
Right.
I mean, I did some work today, but I didn't get paid for it. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean,
I think anyway, any caregiver, most
works.
work and many do not get paid.
Yes.
Don't make the mistake of substituting employment in there. That's not.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, there are people who don't work because they're literally unable to. There are
Yes.
people who are totally bedridden.
Right.
Yeah.
But they are still valuable people who have some skill. I mean, just in looking at doing this Master Gardener thing with the ARC program, to see the caregivers who are working with people who are, they're mentally incapable of holding down a job or driving or anything. But the value of that relationship was wonderful, to see them interacting with their caregivers, and they provide a good relationship for all.
Well,
And so,
yeah, well, I'm talking about people who, yes, those people absolutely are. But there are people who are, maybe even some of them in a coma.
Yeah.
There are people-
That's why he said, don't take this as some kind of technical rule,
Mhm.
because that would be trying to make it into a hard and fast technical rule. When I worked at the PCC, I had to be really careful when people come in for help, not to make assumptions about them, that they didn't work or that they were lazy, and we talked about that. People work pretty hard sometimes just to navigate the system of assistance.
yeah,
And
We do
and we
that
don't-
all the time.
yes.
We do that all. We have programs that people are trying to take away to feed the poor and to help the people, and we sit there and say that's bad because they have to work, and that doesn't mean some sort of little bitty work.
Well-
We're talking about they have to be employed,
But we're talking
or
about the
they're not
Christian.
valued, and we don't value them. And I'm sorry.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's all right. All right, let me read the next paragraph. He said, when he
I'm not
speaks of
bad at
charity,
it.
when he speaks of charities, he went ahead and defined it a little bit. He said a charity is a particular case of distress among your own relatives, friends, neighbors, or employees, which God, as it were, forces upon your notice, may demand much more, even to the crippling and endangering of your own position.
Hmm.
What do you think about that definition?
It's okay.
And in the context of what you just said, Bill, that's where I see this is different than a government program.
Yeah.
In the perfect Christian world, which we don't have, if everyone did what C.S. Lewis just wrote as a Christian, we wouldn't need the government programs. I'm going to just throw that out there.
That's true.
We need government programs because people in our communities don't share.
Right.
They don't give up where they are able.
Mhm.
They don't.
So
They're told that it's evil to do that. I don't know.
yeah, sometimes.
And we force people down to menial work, to do work, but they might be able to do some great work, but we force them down because of the color of their skin or their sex or whatever. We force them down.
And so that'd be violating the do unto others that you'd have. No one would want that done to themselves. So
Right.
that's violating the first rule of Christianity right off.
Mhm.
That can't qualify.
That's why I argue the whole thing about slavery. How could a Christian possibly think
And
that
not-
being the way slaves were treated was an act of Christianity? I just, to this day, I cannot get it.
I agree.
Because Christians have always been full of sinners. That's the short answer.
And Marcia,
Short answer.
they
Yes.
talk about slaves in the Bible. So they all quoted
But
passages
remember,
in the
he was
Bible.
talking about, we take the bits and pieces that we want and we form God into our image
Right.
instead of the other way around.
Mhm.
So that was not a core tenet of the church. It may have been erroneous if they demanded that, but that is not a core Jesus teaching. And
Yeah.
so he twisted
I
it.
disagree that that slavery was an accepted Christian morality even in Jesus's time, because the people that had slaves, Christ. I mean, in our scriptures, it certainly says,
Mhm.
constantly talking about the good treatment of your slave. And again, slave might have been defined a little differently.
Yes.
Yes.
I was thinking that too, Kat. I think for more of a human history than not, slavery was an accepted institution.
Mhm.
And so that's the context of
Economic.
Christ. That's the context Christ lived in. I mean, he wasn't going to snap his finger. He could have snapped his finger and freed all the slaves, but
Didn't make
he
it right.
chose to make us do it
Right.
over 2,000 years or whatever. Right. I mean, I think that's just the way it is. I mean, slavery was an institution for most eras, like low wage jobs are now, or, pick your example.
But the way the slaves were treated in the South in the 1800s, 1800s, was not, generally speaking, was not a Christian tradition.
No.
Not truly Christian.
No. In fact, Lincoln was pretty clever in some of his speeches, because he said, we got Christians in the North and Christians in the South praying to the same God, completely at loggerheads over this, right? Anything else on that? A Christian society is not going to arrive, and this is what Alice just read, until we really want it. And this is C.S. Lewis. He writes on and on about this topic. And we're not going to want it until we become fully Christian. And we could talk about what that means. I cannot really carry it out till I love my neighbor as myself. I cannot learn to love my neighbor as myself till I learn to love God. I cannot learn to love God except by learning to obey him. We are driven on to something more inward, driven on from social matters to religious matters. For the longest way around is the shortest way home, he says. And that was the end of the chapter. What do you think? That makes sense?
Well, Benedict would have been real excited about this, and it makes me wonder whether or not he'd read Benedict. And he didn't read Sister Joan Chittister because she hadn't written it yet. But there was a student in the old tradition that asked the sage, "Where do I look for God?" And the sage said, "You don't have to go looking for God." And the student said, "Well, what do you mean?" And the sage said, "He's right here. If you go out looking, you're looking in the wrong place. You need to look inside." And that's what it seems to me that's what C.S. Lewis is saying here.
Yeah.
And once again, I think we pick and choose who we love, and Jesus even says, love your enemies. I mean, even the pagans love the people who are their friends. And so I think that when we can be inconvenienced and challenged in our thinking, then it opens our hearts, because there are going to be people that it's hard to love.
A special friend of mine reminds me periodically that it's easy to be nice to the nice.
Yeah.
The challenge is loving those that we just find so difficult to live with, for whatever reason. And
I go back. Go ahead, Carl. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say the magic is that when I believe the few times in my life that I've been able to suck it up and go down and really try to get to know them, it was a worthwhile adventure.
Sure.
And I look at the history of religion from Luther and how we started a 30-year war on that. And then I think of even, I'm not picking on Presbyterians here, Tom, but Calvin setting up the utopia in Geneva, whatever you want to call it, a Christian city that fell apart because people were sinners. I can't ever. And it's, even when we talk about forming a true Christian community, which I would love, I'd enter it, I'd join it. I've been looking for a Christian community to join for years, but
you're in one.
You're in it. You're here.
We're here.
I'm here. You're right. So we almost joined a commune way back when, just a Christian commune, just because we thought that. But then when we got into it, it was just there. You started coming up with rules and this and that, and what do you do with this, and what do you do with that, and it becomes, as Carl says, complicated.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Well, we've
some-
we're human.
Yeah.
We are human, and our divine part of us just can't get it together. We're
Somewhere Lewis said, when you break the big laws, you get the small laws. And that makes so much sense to me. If you make the big law, like it really goes to the heart of the matter. If you inwardly, honestly want your neighbor and even your enemy to thrive, you're going to see everything in a different light. You're going to make every decision about your career, about many things are going to be different. And if you don't do that, and if you violate it, then you got to get all the little small laws. Okay, that you can't, you're going to get sued if you do this, and you can't steal that. And so we have thousands and thousands of laws now, right? Because everyone needs to be spoon-fed morality, I guess.
There's
All
another,
right,
And we become fully human. I'm fully Christian.
Yeah.
I just don't know. I would love to. Would be my goal, and it is my goal. But it's a trajectory. I'm hopefully moving towards that direction as I grow. But I don't know if I'll ever get fully Christian.
No, but I think we do progress. I mean, I can remember the first 10 or 15 years of my adult life, I felt like I was just in a rat race, and I was just going to scratch and claw the most rats in front of me out as I could. I thought I was probably polite about that, and I didn't break the law, but that consumed my attention. Does that make sense? I don't think that way now. So that might be progress.
my good friend John Drum reminds me, not enough because I don't remember it often enough, by the way he talks. I tend to be assertive, way too assertive, saying the way things are or the way things should be. When I listen to John Drum over a long period of time, what I hear him do is ask questions. He takes a position that may or may not be his own, and he asks the group, what do you think about? And you never know for sure if that's really where he is or whether or not he really wants to understand what people really believe who hold that position. And it's far 10% of the time does he tell you where he is. 90% of the time he's seeking. And I think that's a powerful gift. And I think that's what, to me, endears me to this group, because I see a lot of people here seeking and trying to understand. And I think that's what we're called to do, to recognize it's complicated and that we need to learn what other people believe and help shape our own wisdom.
And we need to do it as a community, which is in here too. I put that on the slide.
David McGinnis pounded on me at one point when what's the old golfer said on Sunday? I'm communing with God out on the 9th hole. I don't need to go into your church to do that. And David said, yeah, you do. You need to be in community. You need to be there with other people and listen.
You need to bounce these ideas off each other, or we get stuck on our own assumptions,
Yeah, I don't think they're talking about God at the 9th hole.
No.
Only if they miss the par. Sorry.
Talking about Alabama, Auburn.
All right, we are moving on away from sports to morality and psychoanalysis. This chapter is about putting the human machine right. Lewis says there's two jobs for Christians. One, job of seeing how do as you would be done by can be applied in detail to modern society. And two, job of becoming the sort of people who really would apply it if we saw how. So that's kind of like what that's what we've been saying. That's not always so easy when we think there's not a lot of fairness going on out there. He said there is some overlap between Christian morality and Freudian. He mentioned Freud a few times, psychology, but he says they're not the same things because they have a difference in their worldview. I'm going to go on to the next one. Christian morality and psychoanalysis are concerned with the act of choosing. I like this part. And two, feelings and impulses from which we get the raw material to make our choices. And psychological way to look at that. And then there's a moral Christian way that you apply a template. Lewis said some feelings are common to all people and some are unnatural. where something has gone wrong. Fear of real danger, most of us have. Fear of cats or spiders or large crowds is not natural to most people. And we all know how, good psychological treatment can help that. Psychoanalysis may cure subconscious irrational fears, which no amount of moral effort can help. Morality, he says, is only concerned with free choice. Bad psychological material is a disease, not a sin. I went over a lot of stuff in that chapter. Does anyone see that or have any other way to articulate that? It was a lot to put in one or two slides.
Tom, I know you'll be able to tell me chapter and verse, and I mean that with tremendous respect. Where was it that Paul talked about doing what he didn't want to do and knowing what he wanted to do, but not being able to do it? You know, that series of verses that everybody loves to be able to read when they're called on to.
Yeah, I can't remember that.
Well,
I want to, someone Google it real quick.
This line where you say no amount of moral effort can help. Oops, can you go back to where that? Yeah. It's only concerned with free choice, and bad psychological material is a disease, not a sin. I think many of us, I think I frequently get caught up on the morality or immorality paths where I can sit and rationalize a course of behavior that seems reasonable. But when I hold it up against other light and other standards, it's unreasonable.
Yeah.
And vice versa. I could name a lot of examples, but most of them deal with people whom either I feel called to support at all costs, or people I feel called to disdain at all cost. And neither one, both of those can be very harmful.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't hear that last sentence.
Both of those can be very harmful.
Yeah.
You cannot support one person and sacrifice your duty to others.
Yeah.
You shouldn't. There are times when you cannot simply support one person and sacrifice your duty to others. There are times when you simply cannot say that person is irretrievable. I need to invest my energy over here and exclude them from my life.
Yeah.
I think both of those approaches are flawed. They are not, I believe they are not Christian. And I love Dallas's response, which was just love each other. And it's complicated. It can be real hard to love each other.
Yeah.
But we're called to do it.
Carl, I just put that quote. It's Romans 7. I just put it in the chat.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Lewis went on and said, and so this is the same topic. Some think Christian morality is a kind of bargain. God says, if you keep a lot of rules, I'll reward you. And if you don't, I'll do the other thing. I like that. Lewis believes every time you make a choice, you're turning the central part of you, the part of you that chooses, into something a little different from what it was before. I really like that idea. I think it's true. All your life, you're slowly turning this central thing either into a heavenly creature or to a hellish creature, into a creature that is in harmony with God and with other creatures and with itself, or into one that is a state of war and hatred with God and with its fellow creatures and with itself. To be one kind of creature is heaven, peace, joy, knowledge, and power. The other kind is madness, horror, idiocy, rage, eternal loneliness. Each of us is at every moment progressing to one state or the other. Comments. It's almost like poetry to me. So especially each little decision you make. If you see someone in need and you just turn away and say, it's going to make it a lot easier to turn away the next time and the next time. If you do it the other way around, like someone was saying a little while ago, and you get to actually know someone, you find out they're not lazy. They actually work hard. They actually want the same things I want. And you're more likely to help them out.
I think it's much the same way as if you tell a lie or you have some secret that holds power over you. It just rather diminishes you, and you become less of yourself than what God wants you to be. And I think that the choosing that you do, and you can choose to lie and deceive others, and in doing so deceive yourself. And I think in the other way of choosing to move into a, a closer relationship with God and Christ, then you become more of who you're meant to be. And so your choices will begin to reflect that.
I don't disagree with that at all. I appreciate that very much, Mary. I just had I feel like C.S. Lewis is, the way that it is put is a little bit too straight line for me, because I do believe that we're going to make some good choices, and then here comes a bad one.
Oh, sure. I think so too.
So, it seems perfectly fine. It's all about the will to persevere because we love God and know He can help us. But just because you make some bad choices, I mean, I totally understand what you're saying. I'm going to stop talking. Never mind.
No. Because I had such a difficult relationship with my mother, I could have easily have stayed in a place where it was hateful and hurtful, both to her and to me. But at some point, I had to turn from that because it was hurting me. And it was going to continue to hurting me until I finally said, I can't do this. And I couldn't always be around her. So, Carl, I couldn't be around her because I wasn't able to withstand. I was too vulnerable to be able to resist that. And so I think in some respect, you have to move away from some difficult situations to be able to find a place where you can handle other people. I don't know where Jesus says that. That might be a Mariology.
I remember Billy Graham once saying, I went to a few of his rallies in Chicago, and he said, interestingly, there's one sin that is going to predominate in your life, and there's nothing wrong with just running. Get away from it. Don't put yourself back there.
Yeah.
So I still remember that from Billy Graham.
Yeah, flee from evil. Yeah, and
in your case, that does not necessarily mean that you were not honoring your mother.
Right. Let me tell you, if I'd stood in her presence, there would be no honoring.
I will say, in Mary's case, I think the way she handled it opened the door for reconciliation later. So I think when we make mistakes, that's not necessarily changing us for the worse. We make mistakes, we make a bad choice. I think we're getting caught up in the semantics here.
Right.
But when you're trying to follow the golden rule, you're changing your insides a little bit for the better each time. Yeah. And if you don't, you ignore it, you're changing yourself in the other direction. I think that's the point he's trying to make.
Yeah.
I see a lot of yawning going on.
Oh, okay.
That's all right.
Chapter 5.
We're time.
Sexual malicious. Oh, look,
I'm tired.
How did I know that? You want to go for 5 or 10 more minutes?
Yes.
I want to talk about the virtue of chastity.
He uses a great example in here. I hope we can get to it. So sexual morality. I thought maybe I'd just let Mary take care of this. No. Sexual morality, or he says what Christians call chastity. The Christian rule of chastity is not to be confused with the rule of modesty, i.e. propriety or decency. And this is where different societies have different
Right.
mores.
Yeah, mores, yeah.
And he went into some examples where what someone wears now would be a huge sin 300 years ago, but now because
30 years ago.
or 30 years ago. So he says being unchaste is acting in ways that, quote, incite lust in themselves or others. So that's the sin part of sex, is if you're acting in ways that excite lust in yourself or others. I'm just putting it out there. Christianity is almost but he says Christianity is not anti-sex. Christianity is one of the few great religions which thoroughly approves of the body, which believes that matter is good, that God himself once took a human body, that some kind of body is going to be given to us in heaven, and is going to be an essential part of our happiness or beauty and our energy. And when we first started, we talked about some of the religions that thought all matter was bad. They were dualism, right? So does anyone not like any of that or think that makes any sense?
These are not words that are.
I mean, how would you define sexual
or chastity?
I mean, how would you define sexual immorality? Should put that question in there.
I don't know.
Well, I think to a certain extent it goes back to our social morality versus Christian morality.
Yeah.
All right. What is sexual immorality in social terms?
Bear with me and be brutal.
Yeah.
It goes back to this whole notion of loving each other. If I really love, and pick any one of you, if I really love Marcia, I would never do anything immoral that Marcia would see as immoral, because I would be violating my professed love for Marcia. And it holds for everybody. And where it gets complicated is that we don't have the courage or the strength to resist the temptation frequently. And the temptation might be to go off and gamble, to go take the paycheck and go off and gamble it.
Yep.
At one point, and I don't remember when it was and whether I heard it or I made it up, I don't know which. Every one of us knows right from wrong. What most of us want to know is what we can get away with. Speaking for one. And so, my thought.
He did go on to say a little bit that he thinks things have gone wrong in our society, even back in his day, with sexuality, that we've managed to separate love and sex. And how many movies have you seen where there's a hot, steamy sexual sex scene, and when the guy loves the girl and the girl says, "Oh, this isn't about love. This was just sex," right? To me, that would be immoral, I guess.
What I would say, my definition of morality, or one of my definitions, has to do with whether or not someone is hurt.
Me too. Yeah.
Exactly.
And that's one of the ways, way back when the society was beginning to deal with homosexuality, and I knew how I believed, but I was trying to reconcile that with what I felt was my Christianity.
Yeah.
And the issue was when two people are in a loving relationship and taking care of each other, who is hurt in that relationship?
Right.
No one. And
what about friends with benefits?
That I think that people get hurt in those situations.
Yeah, I would put that in a category where socially in our culture, that's probably okay. But from a Christian standpoint, that would be a sin.
I agree with you. I agree with you. I agree with you totally, Tom.
Louis, oh, go ahead.
I do have a little struggle with Christians being the one that think that the body and sex is good. when I think of the history of how often we said the first sin was Mary, and many Christians would say that the first was when Adam knew Eve was the first sin. It was sex was the original sin. Many Christians.
Who says that?
I've never heard that. I've never heard that
Many
from
Christians say that, and it's very strong within the Protestant, And then you think, of the Catholic Church, what it did with we have Mary. She has to be virgin because also because sex was impure. So the Church has done that with that type of thing. We've taken
what church?
sex.
What church says that? What denomination actually says? I've never heard that.
Came down from
The Catholic Church says that. What do you think?
That sex is a sin?
No,
No, that Mary
they
has
said that Mary had to
Oh,
be
no,
virgin.
I'm talking about before when you talk about Mary, that
And
the
I
original
think
sin.
there are people, there are Protestant churches that believe that sex was the original sin.
I've
I
never-
mean, it came from the
I
Catholics.
don't know.
And the whole idea that the Immaculate Conception is not Jesus's conception, it's Mary's conception.
Right.
Mary had to be pure. And make her
had to-
pure, she had to be conceived without sex, which of course is, but that's what the Catholic Church taught, and all of the Protestant churches, to some extent, are descended from the Catholic Church. Now they pick and choose, and
Hey,
I don't know
I was
which
raised
one.
in the Catholic Church, and I never heard that sex was the first sin. And
I heard that all growing up a lot of my time.
Really? That must, oh,
That
yeah.
sex, sex is a wonderful thing when it's done right, for sure.
Well,
And you and I have
well,
been an example of that.
let's just,
We do right sex.
I think C.S. Lewis, I guess C.S. Lewis and his looking at Episcopals and the denominations he mentioned early on didn't find that a common belief. So maybe some
Well,
believe
Maybe
that.
that's a common.
I would say that would not be a common Christian belief. I would just say.
Well,
I would say it was frowned upon, but not that it was totally sinful.
well, it has to.
Let me
Okay.
let's look at this example about he thinks a lot of our sin, our moral, our human machine going wrong is about excess and things that he calls we have instincts, our sexual instincts, good, but sometimes our sexual instinct becomes unnatural and bad. And I don't want to go into the details. Everyone has a different definition of that. But and he didn't go into it so much there, but he said, well, let's take food. Let's pretend not sex. We're going to talk about food. He says sexual appetite, like other appetites, grows by indulgence. I think that's true. Drinking, working, almost anything. Starving men may think much about food, but so do gluttons. The gorged as well as the famished like titillations. And then he talked about a food striptease, watching a person slowly undress on stage. Is a striptease we hear of. Now he says, now suppose you came to a country where you could fill a theater by simply bringing a covered plate onto the stage and then slowly lifting the cover so as to let everyone see just before the lights went out that it contained a mutton chop or a bit of bacon. Would you not think that country something had gone wrong with the appetite for food? I think that's a really great example of what happens. What do you think? Do you see? Does that make sense?
I don't,
Where our appetite was perverted, or appetite is now messed up.
a little bit. I don't totally buy his analogy because I think sex is different than food, but I understand kind of what he's saying. It's something to think about.
So beautiful woman, is he saying, so a beautiful woman who is if she is in a relationship and with, you use it for her husband, she's undressing, it's a wonderful thing, but it's perverted when it's broadcast to everybody and they're lusting after her. And the same thing would be with food. Food
Yes.
is good, we need it for our bodies, but to always be thinking of your next meal and how luscious everything is,
I would say we actually do this a little bit with all the food ads on TV. And in this country, we have an obesity problem that's horrible because we parade food like it's an end in itself. And C.S. Lewis would say that's kind of a perversion of the appetite for food.
Just make sure you bring it Sunday.
Yeah. No, eating is not bad.
No,
Eating good food is
I
bad.
enjoy it.
Sex is not bad. Eating is not bad.
I've enjoyed it.
All right. I have a little bit about Christian marriage. Oh my gosh. If you want to read through these, or are we too tired? Is everyone ready to quit? Because he doesn't say a lot about this, but he does say that he's probably not the best judge of marriage because he wasn't married at this point, and it was a long time till he was. And when I was reading through this, I just sort of got the idea that Paul wasn't the best marriage counselor either. Right?
Amen.
But it lasted as word of God forever.
Yeah. And I think sometimes when we pick and choose scriptures like we do and try to make a whole marriage model out of that, that's probably not good. But he goes in here and talks about how the biblical idea is two people literally become one person, and that one person, it should be a permanency to that, at least in your promise, at least the oath you make. And that if it's just about sex, why make the promise? So that's kind of the gist of that chapter. If anyone has any more comments.
Well, I would like to comment that you didn't go into his ideas of who's the head of the household.
I did that on
Where's
purpose.
the
I left out on purpose.
and that sort of thing. You conveniently left that out. He certainly didn't know anything about marriage, in my opinion.
You're hot.
The head of the household.
All right, I'm going to give you the short.
And
the short-
I really
I'm gonna
think
give you the-
marriage vows should be changed to say we will work together,
I think
Yeah.
many of them have been.
to make this relationship work.
Yeah.
I just think this business of love, honor, and obey. I didn't have obey in
No, I didn't either.
1963 because I knew I'd be making a big dang lie.
Here, I did make a note in my private notes that you don't get to see. He said, because I knew someone would bring this up. He said the chapter ends with a discussion of something even more unpopular than the idea that marriage should be permanent. So he's admitting in the popular culture of his day, permanent marriage was unpopular, and man as head of the household was even more unpopular. But he goes on to say, Christian wives promise. So let me just read this quick. It's not long. Christian wives promise to obey the husband. Lewis said this raises two questions. Why the need for a head at all? Why should the man be it? As long as the two partners agree, there is no need for a quote unquote head. He hoped this is the normal state in a Christian marriage. But what if there's a real disagreement? First, talk it over seriously. But if agreement can't be reached, if marriage is to be permanent, one of the two must have the power of deciding. And he was never married, so that's kind of that's how he.
Yeah.
He said the man was kind of the family's foreign policy person, and the woman was primarily fighting for her own children, and the husband was fighting against the rest of the world, which is kind of sad, but yeah, that's a very unsatisfying explanation, but that was it.
It doesn't work.
That's probably the way it was in 1950 or whenever he wrote this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
mean-
the way the world was. That is more of a social.
At my house.
Well, this is not 1960. This is 1943, when most of the men really were at war, right? And the women were home trying to protect the children. I mean, this is
Doing
very
everything while the
very
men
concrete.
were fighting.
Yeah. And,
Yes.
we have changed marriage vows. Many times you're allowed to, make up your own vows. And I don't know how the Episcopal Church does that, but the Presbyterian Church did not have obey any longer.
Mary never pledged to obey me, and she doesn't.
Well, she strong should have.
But But if you're honest with one another, then it's going to be a covenant relationship.
No.
Right.
And that is a relationship
Presbyterian
that
with it.
Christ has with us and that has with the church. And so I think that is what is the emphasis with Paul making his silly statement that I think of wives submit to your husbands as men submit to Christ. And in that submission, it's like you've got a greater submission to Christ than I do to you as a man, is my thinking. So men, you better toe the line.
I really don't think the principle lets anyone off. It's still supposed to be a equal partnership. And that's the way Mary and I talked about this. We don't see either one of us as superior. And I really don't think that's what Paul meant, but anyway. I still hoped we didn't go into that.
You want to get your sin forgiven, we'll talk later.
I'd like to comment on this quickly on the slide before. It was about being completely unified by a force of will or act of will. Let's see. It is a deep unity maintained by will and strengthened by habit. I certainly agree to an extent, but there's a point at which you realize that your will is just not good enough, and it's gonna have to be God's will.
I think Kat, he was comparing the force of your will to the feeling, like when you're on your honeymoon. He said if a marriage is dependent on the feeling of being in love, and he went into this in some detail, then that marriage may not last long, because love is way more than just feeling in love. It is a commitment. It's an act of the will. I think that's what he was saying.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. I think we did all right.
Yeah. Thank you.
You always do.
I was sweating there.
9.8.
What?
9.8. 9.6.
There's a lot of tough issues in there. I mean, think of the number of issues we went through. I mean,
Yeah.
you know,
And
all the
our
issues that
children.
still haunt society, right and left, right?
Yeah.
So, any other comments or questions about the chapters?
Thank you.
Good night.
Phew.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good night. Thanks,
Good night.
everybody.
Good night.
Good
Thank
night.
you.
Bye.
Next week.